Yeah, first, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Michael Wallace for helping us set this up. So thank you. And then just how things are going to work, I'll introduce Michael to everybody, and then we can turn things over to him just to speak for a little bit. And then probably for the majority, we can just kind of have a back and forth Q&A conversation, if that works. Yeah, so I'll go ahead. So Michael obviously is the co-founder and CEO of Strava. This is a room full of really enthusiastic Strava users. But before then, Michael also co-founded Kana Software, an enterprise software firm. Before that, he was the CFO and VP of operations at Glycofy, a biotech company. Michael holds a PhD in economics from Northwestern University, and he's a Harvard alumnus, got his AB in economics here. And during that time, he was also, I think, the team captain of the men's lightweight crew team. Obviously, before then, or some point in his journey, he was an economics professor at Stanford University, and also was an associate professor at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College. We're really excited to have the chance to hear from you, Michael, and so glad that you can take some time out of your schedule to come be with us. Thanks again to Michael Wallace, and without further ado, I'll turn things over to you. And if you need to, I think I made you a co-host, so if you have any visual things, if not, you should be able to do that if you need to.
Okay. Great. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. Always fun to talk about the founding of Strava, or any, the concept of founding something, starting a company in the first place. Just that's something you can go do. It turns out it's available to you, which maybe was not in my view when I was in Harvard at all. The idea that starting companies would be something I would do in my life, but yeah, so I'm happy to follow whatever format you want to do. And I know there were some thoughts to some questions we should tackle at the outset, but then also leave plenty of questions for Q&A. I had time for Q&A, so.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think it'd be great if, maybe you could just tell us a little, the abridged version of kind of your time at Harvard, and then how that led into some of your experiences, both continuing into academia and then transitioning and founding some of the companies you're involved with, and now Strava. And then, however long that takes, we can just go straight into questions.
Great. Okay. Well, yeah, great. We'll do. So I was class of 1988. And it's funny now looking, you read books. I don't know if any of you have read books about the 80s, maybe early 90s. They make it sound like it was this crazy time where it was wild, and it just didn't. My memory it was wild, because we always thought as the 60s as the wild time. We were not nearly as wild as the people in the 60s. So, but where my sort of story starts was, grew up in the Boston area in a town called Hingham on the South Shore. It's a coastal town. It was when we moved there in the early 70s, after I lived in Sweden when I was a very young child. My mom is Swedish. We moved to the Hingham area because my dad wanted to be near the ocean, but that was at that point, it was way far out. No one ever drove into Boston for work from Hingham. That was way too far. And now it's like the epicenter of commuting suburb from Boston. So it's not that far away, but it was I don't think I had ever stepped foot in Cambridge until I had already accepted at Harvard. It was that concept of getting around and moving around wasn't a thing when I was growing up. And so I lived a pretty, I would say definitely very privileged life. I went to public high school in Hingham, but it's incredibly protected, away from, any kind of real world experience. And so, in other words, it's far away from Boston. It's got good schools. It's got sort of people move there when they want to raise a family, and they want everything to be safe. And there's very little adventure going on unless you get out in a boat in the ocean. So getting into Harvard was I don't know, maybe it's this shares some of this experience. I didn't even think about applying to Harvard until my guidance counselor said, I think you should apply to Harvard. I was okay, I'll apply to Harvard. Didn't know that much about it. Hadn't really been to Cambridge, even though it was a subway ride away. And then you get there, and a lot of things started to and my eyes started to open a lot to lots of things there. But one of the things I wasn't an athlete to speak much of in high school. I wasn't like I was a very good high school athlete. I played certain sports, but at Harvard, I decided to go to the organizational meeting for the crew team. Liked it a whole lot more than the meeting I went to the day before for the sailing team. So I thought I'd try out for crew, and that's where this whole story that actually turns into Strava started. Funny enough, it was because of that experience of being involved on a daily basis with a group of people around something that I grew to love to do. And we became good at it because we spent a lot of time trying. Having that experience ultimately led to meeting Mark Gainey, my co-founder. He was class of 90. It ultimately led to, when we graduated from college, we lost the team. And as a result of losing the team, we lost the motivation to stay active and stay as fit. So Strava was a way to get the boathouse back. It was a way to build the team through technology. And at Strava, connecting people to other people who help them stay active is a way to keep everyone motivated and active. So it's as simple as what we had experienced in real life between the people and places and the competition in the boathouse is what we try to create on Strava, make available to people, enable for people every day. So, I'll just summarize this like you mentioned, I got a PhD in economics and had this former life as an academic professor of economics in different ways and different places. Again, wasn't thinking of starting companies or even that Strava was going to be the thing that I did at the time, but was really motivated by many of the same things that are true about academia are actually the same as entrepreneurship. It's just with ideas instead of with people. Like, you're trying to create something out of nothing with research, whether that's in economics or in the life sciences. It's like you're trying to create knowledge, and with a company, you're creating a product, an idea that doesn't exist yet until you have it and you start to build it. And what I like better about entrepreneurship compared to the academic world was largely around, I really get motivated by assembling a team of people together to go do something together, whereas academia, you're doing a lot of work by yourself or maybe with one or two co-authors. So I like the team aspect of entrepreneurship more so than the solitary work of an academic. But I'll stop there and see if we want to dive into any of those themes or ask other questions.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. That's great. I know Megan and I have a few questions, but I think it'd probably be best to just open it up to anybody. And then if anything remains unasked, we can ask our questions, Megan. But I guess people, if you want to just raise your hand on the whatever that tool is, and then we can call on you. Megan, could you help me monitor that?
Yeah, absolutely. Or even I was going to say, maybe we could just go a little bit more in depth to some of that story. Yeah. I know I also walked onto the rowing team, and we have a couple rowers here, a lot of athletes and people who have also had athletic experiences outside of a structured team. So I wonder if you could talk first more about your time on that team and how that informed Strava. And it sounded like directly out of your teammate that partnership came.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned you walked onto the crew team, and I did the same thing as not having rowed before in high school. That was pretty common back then. And in my understanding from talking to the coaches now, that's really not the way it happens anymore. It's pretty rare. But back then, rowing wasn't really well established as a high school sport unless you had gone to private school or you happened to live in a community that had a really vibrant community rowing program. So first of all, just acknowledging that it doesn't have to be sports. It doesn't have to be, a particular sport. But what I think if you have connected with a group of people where you share a passion for something that you do, and you do it a lot. I mean, you're every day you're devoting time to it. That's, I think, where some of the most meaningful moments come in any experience in life, is the stuff that you love to do so much you do it all the time, and you are doing it. You're trying to become you're trying to master it. You're trying to become really good at it. That's where I think you develop the most meaningful, at least for me, the most meaningful experiences. And rowing taught me a lot about what it takes to, you've heard the word, you got to focus. Okay. So I think focus is really important, but you have to first decide what you want to focus on. And if you decide that well, then focus on it, then great things can happen. And rowing is like, we decided we wanted to be the best collegiate lightweight crew team in the country. And so we focused on it, and we worked at it, and we worked at it together as a team, and we accomplished that goal. And that was the first, like, wow, you can do that. Cause that's not the way maybe I was wired before I got there. As a good student, I liked being active, but it wasn't like I decided what I wanted to be the best at. And so that experience of, wow, I can do that. That was like an eye opener for me and many of my teammates. So leaving that, and again, finding myself, maybe a little bit more of the story of the academic side, which did lead also to the entrepreneurship side. If you think about it as, there's some path dependency to all this that's very random, which is I decided to get a PhD based on some work. After working for a couple of years, I decided I'd get a PhD in economics. It wasn't that a thing I thought I was going to do at graduation. And by getting a PhD in economics, I got the job at Stanford teaching the econ department. And Stanford is like a great place to teach economics, but I happened to get the job and started in 1994 I show up at the econ department in the summer of 1984, and I'm sitting in my office, and in walks the IT person for the department and says, "I'm going to install a browser on your computer now." And I said, "What's a browser?" And he said, "You haven't heard of the internet?" I was like, "No, I haven't heard of the internet." And he's like, "Okay, well, I'm going to blow your mind." So he installs, a piece of software on my computer. That's the browser. And within a couple of weeks, Mark, my co-founder, he's working for a venture capital firm in Palo Alto. Also serendipity, right? Because we were friends. It's kind of one of the reasons I decided Stanford was the better option. Is like I at least knew Mark there. I was married. I'm widowed, so my wife passed away 4 years ago. But we're very young. We have a baby. We know nobody in San Francisco except Mark, and so it's great that he's like, bike ride away from me at my office, and he shows up, week 2 or something, and we start talking about this thing called the internet and what it might mean in our lives. And like, neither one of us is an entrepreneur. We haven't started Kana Software. We certainly haven't even started to think about being entrepreneurs together. And so all that to say is like, you could say it's all path dependent, completely random. And then there's a saying that I think has really helped me in my life, which is the harder you work, the luckier you get. Like serendipity does strike, but it will strike more often the more you have some element of what it is you're trying to sort out about your own self, your own life. And to me, that was the eye opener for me, was like, okay, so this is really new. How is this going to change my life? I was really curious about that question. What is this going to mean to me personally? Wasn't thinking starting a company or anything, but what is this going to do that's going to change the way that I live or the way that my family lives? It's had a big impact on many people's lives. I know that for many of you, you probably haven't ever remembered a time when you didn't have some aspect of technology in your life and the internet in your life. And so for me, maybe it's a starker contrast between before and after. But once we start talking about what could this idea do, this piece of technology do, we pretty quickly came to like, what problem are we trying to solve for ourselves? And that's another aspect, which is maybe a lesson I've learned is be curious about the things that you say are problems, because they're also opportunities. So the things that you find problematic or vexing in your own life could be the things that if you unlock them or solve them, could be basis for a more meaningful life for yourself. That's my hope. But then also sometimes it's the same thing that could also make for a more meaningful life for other people as well. And that's usually the basis for a good idea to start a company, is you're solving your own problem, which also turns out as a problem for other people. And the problem we went right to was, boy, we really miss our team. We miss the daily routine of checking what the workout is, doing the workout, training for the competitions, competing. Could we get that back with this thing called the internet by building the virtual locker room? And that's really where even in 1995, we were telling the story, or we were at least telling each other the story of we could create this thing on the internet It would look like you could meet your friends there somehow. You could upload workouts, whether that's manual or some other way, we don't really know, maybe even share photos. Like what we were telling was the story of a social network, right? We were saying you can interact with people through the internet. And when we said, that sounds like a pretty cool thing. Well, let's go talk to some people who actually know how to program computers, because we didn't. Here comes another lesson, which is, turns out you don't need to know how to do everything in life. That's should be a big relief. You don't have to be the expert at everything, because there are really great people out there who would love to come and work on your idea with you. If you're willing to share a little bit about, like, here's my idea, here's why I think it might be interesting, you can usually find some people who can do the things you can't do and team up with them. So we talked to a few people who knew how to program computers, and they said, wait a minute, you want people to be able to, like, interact with other people on a website and share things, and you think people are going to be cool with that, and you think that technology can make that happen. Like, this is 1995. None of the things that we know, like JavaScript, hadn't been invented yet. We were doing, everybody was on a dial-up connection, except if the people in academia. I think that's half the reason why Mark would come to my office, is because I had actually had a fast internet connection. So there was, like, all this seemed really foreign to the people who actually knew how to do these things today. So we had to end up scrapping that idea. We didn't create Strava back in '95. We created this other company instead. Different story we can talk about if you're interested. But the idea, in fast forward to 2009, the idea was still there in our heads. And by then, everything had changed. Facebook had started. The world had gone mobile. Mobile phones had GPS chips in them in short order. Those could track workouts. And so now the ingredients were there for that idea that came from a place even back into the early 90s. That's where the idea came from this experience. It was now ready ready to see the light of day by starting Strava and pulling a team of people together who, again, we still couldn't do anything. We still couldn't program computers even by 2009. And so we had to pull a team together to help us do that, which we did. So stop there and see if that's prompted any questions in the group.
Yeah, I think you just touched on a really interesting point. I think you mentioned it seemed like it just wasn't the time because the technology wasn't there yet for something like Strava. And so I think at that point that was when you were working on Kana, your other software company, right? So I'm just curious, like, obviously you pivoted and you went and did that with your partner. But like, was that because this idea, like, led naturally into that, or did you just kind of move forward because you found another opportunity and kept this in the back of your mind, like knowing that you always wanted to come back to this later?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mean, we were really inexperienced. We weren't entrepreneurs yet. We were would-be or wanna-be entrepreneurs, we thought. And so when we're going out and talking about this idea of the virtual locker room, and we were hearing all sorts of reasons why it wouldn't work, one of these web development companies we were talking to, like group of engineers, said, they took pity on us. Basically, they're like, oh, it's too bad, your idea won't work. But here's an idea that might work. Here's the thing that's a problem that you might go figure out and solve that's much better than that idea of the virtual locker room. And they said, we're building websites for these companies that have never had to actually interact with their end use customer before. And these were sporting goods companies. They were companies like Eagle River Backpacks. I don't know if you know of any of these brands, or K2 Skis, or a handful of other. Trek Bicycles was one of their clients. They were building just rudimentary first websites. So version 1.0 of Trek Bicycles website was built by a group called the Cedro Group back in 1995. And they said, the problem is we build these websites, and now the customer who buys the bicycle, who used to just go to the bike shop and deal with the bike shop owner if there was a problem, they'd go to talk to the person who sold bikes if they wanted to buy a bike. They're now going to the website for Trek Bicycles, and they want to interact with Trek directly. And Trek's like, whoa, wait, we don't talk to customers. We let the bike shops talk to the customers, right? So this is the first realization that in the internet age, instead of the customer knowing all about the brand has to know all about the customer. The brand has to interact directly with the end user, the customer, in the consumer space. And that's something that was just like dawning on companies back when they created their first websites. And so this group, Cedro Group, said, a problem that these companies keep telling us is, we put this little email us button on their website, and they keep calling us and say, turn that off. We're getting emails from our customers. We don't want that. We have no way to respond to it, right? So while you and I, well, we individuals had software programs to handle person-to-person email, companies did not have software systems to handle these now internet-enabled means of communication between their customer and themselves. They didn't know how to handle even a few hundred email messages a day coming into their email account. We heard like silly stories of people printing out emails, cutting them with scissors, dividing them up into people's inbox, like literal mailboxes in the mailroom. So people would go home and write responses on the piece of paper, bring them back to the office, and then someone would type them up and send them back out. That was the way they were handling customer email. So Kana software, so, as wannabe entrepreneurs, we're kind of disappointed that the virtual locker room won't work. But we hear this seems like a problem. We're like, we have no idea about any of this. We don't know anything about customer service. We don't know how to program computers. We certainly don't know anything about email, except we use it. But we're like, can't be that hard, right? So we start thinking about this problem, and we realize it's a big problem. We see that's starting to be like something that people are actually talking about in the news, that companies are now inundated with new problems as a result of technology, not just the technology solving problems. And so we say, why not? Let's see what we can do. And we start to, so Kana software ended up being, just to fast forward what it became enterprise software company. We sold email customer relationship management systems that were based on email, but also chat and other means of handling this electronically. And we sold this to large companies, small companies, but we took the company public in 1999. We were both out of it by 2000. The company still exists today. And at its height, it maybe had 3,000 or 4,000 people working for it. It probably generates, a few $100 million in revenue. And it was started by these two guys who didn't know anything about anything, right? So how is that, like, that is not just that point in time. It's not just us. It can happen anytime, anywhere. And that's I think that the thing about entrepreneurship as like, it's not a thing you go do, it's a mindset. Entrepreneurship is it's not, you have a specific skill, it's you have an attitude. You have a mindset, a way of looking at the world. And I think the right place to teach entrepreneurship is not in business school. It's not even in college. It's in high school. It's in elementary school. It's a way of thinking about the world as like, some people actually don't want to go work on someone else's problem. They want to figure out the answers to their own set of, like, to the problems that they think are interesting. And it's okay to do that. I think we get into this mindset of you have to take the classes in high school to get the grades, to get into college, to learn the things that you go, and then you can go work for a company, or you can go work for a consulting firm or investment bank. And there's nothing wrong with that. That is true. That is a good path, and it can work for a lot of people. But what about the people for whom, like, gosh, that seems like really limiting? And I that's the mindset of, I want to go out and figure out something either that means a lot to me, that could change the world, or that could have impact for some people, or that could really be, that could result in a very successful company monetarily. So that mindset of there are problems out there that are waiting to be solved, and I want to go find the ones that are interesting to me and go solve them. That's entrepreneurship. That's what it is all about.
Yeah, I think that language of sort of what matters to you and not being limited by a certain path reminds me of what you said earlier about focus. I think focus is a really important word. And it's often hard to achieve, I think, as a college student, where you are necessarily spread so thin. Even as an athlete, if that's sort of your one place where you're allocating your time, I think it's very difficult to zero in on one thing and do it well. So I guess I'm wondering if you could speak more to that, and maybe what eventually made you focus on Strava out of your myriad experiences, and then what, if anything, about Strava is designed to focus its users on whatever they want to focus on about their own training.
Yeah, that's good theme there. So it's, Strava came from a place which was very much like we wanted to solve our own problem. How do we stay motivated for ourselves to be active? And then we thought maybe our friends would like it too. And we were pretty modest. And like when we said, it doesn't have to be big, it has to be great. It has to be really meaningful to us and the people who use it. And it turns out a lot of people have this problem that we had, which was, I want to be more active than I am, and I need something to help me do that. And so like by extension, it ends up being now it's used by tens of millions of people around the world. I think the published statistic is that we have over 70 million athletes around the world who have registered on Strava. And we're helping, hopefully what we're doing is that grows all the time. We're adding about 2 million new registrants a month. Hopefully what we're doing is helping them live a more meaningful life. And so what this means to me is like, I think of, well, if I have anything that I can contribute to Strava today as the CEO of the company, what I can do is I can, first of all, just make sure we have a team that's really motivated. They understand the why behind the company, the why of why are we doing this in the first place? It's to bring joy and meaning to people's lives by motivating them to stay active. Like that's as simple as that. We can say that. Hopefully everyone in the company can repeat that. And hopefully that's something our athletes might even say, oh yeah, I could guess that is the why, just by how I use it and how it makes me feel. But with that sense of, that's the reason for me that why it's so important to continue with the work here at Strava, and why, I've had many different roles over the years at the company, and why, this just is something I keep going back to, is because I believe that fundamentally this is something that can have impact for hundreds of millions of people eventually. We can continue to grow and expand who Strava is for. Today, it does tend to skew towards people who are more active than the average. Over time, I think we can broaden the front door, if you will, so that we can help even people who don't even know that they want to be active yet. We can start to help them as well. It definitely improves health and maybe the quality of life for those individuals, but by extension, it also improves life for the people who are connected to those people, even if they're not on Strava. So that's a real driver, motivator for me, is the way in which Strava could have that impact in the world. Another thing that motivates me, why I choose to focus on Strava, why I think it's important work, is the team we're building. We have about 220 people today. We're in a pretty big growth phase right now. We're starting to add more people after being at roughly this size for about the last year. And assembling that team and pulling people together and connecting them to the work that they find meaningful is really fun. It's really great. It's a really enjoyable thing to see that people love the work they're doing. Not everyone. I mean, we lose a few people also. We're not some kind of magic company that doesn't, but by and large, most people come and they stay and they do great work, and they reflect that back in things like saying, Strava's been really a meaningful part of my career so far. I've gotten a lot out of being here, and I've done some of my best work here. And that's a really incredibly rewarding part of it for me personally, is because, again, maybe this is again another way in which I think about things in life, is that every single individual in the world, anybody has an incredible potential. Think about it as more like, I'm not a physicist, but every atom has incredible potential. E equals MC squared when I was a kid, I was like, wow, that's cool. Like the smallest thing has so much energy in it. If you could unlock that energy, every person has incredible potential. And so one of the things that I do is, can I in some way tap into just a little bit more and so they can see and realize the potential they have inside themselves. Because when they do, not only does it benefit Strava, but it does something for them. It does something for them as an individual. It does something for them for their future. And that creating that environment where that can happen daily for lots and lots of people, that's energizing. It gets me out of bed every morning, jumping and ready to go and eager. Not every day. Sometimes I'm tired, but most of the time I'm really excited about the work we're doing and about the potential to build a great team of people who are doing the work.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's also a really relevant point for us. Obviously, most of us here are, involved in some way or another with the outing club, and a big part of our lives is getting outside. And so one of our goals as an organization is like how to help people who have never stepped foot, in in a non-urban setting or like out in the mountains or whatever, like making them comfortable taking that first step. And obviously, as you said, like Strava started out a little bit more for like the elite athlete, but that's grown. So I'm curious, like, like how you see it being possible, or like what are the ways that make it easier to have people who are at a novice level feel comfortable joining that community? Like, what are like the pragmatic steps that you can actually take to make that happen?
Yeah, we're probably just learning that ourselves, but I can talk a little bit about it. Starts with identity and safety. About that identity, being able, you think if you're signing up for a new service on the internet, you're entering some personal information. Can you trust the site to keep that information secure? That's a basic. That's like table stakes, right? So do people trust Strava? How do you build that trust when you've just met somebody, and you actually haven't met them? Your website has met them. Your app has met them. The next level is how much do you give them the ability to say, well, this is who I am, and does it feel good to be that, to represent myself that way on Strava? Constraining people to, for example, we don't do this, but suppose we said, okay, on the onboarding experience, tell us, we need some information from you to be able to show your profile. What's your fastest marathon time, half marathon time, 10K, 5K, and mile? I don't think a lot of people are going to be who don't know, who aren't active, who aren't willing, are going to be willing to say, yeah, this site's for me, this app is for me. They're going to feel like I can't be myself and feel good about that because I'm just starting out as a runner. I better find some other app, or I'm just not comfortable being here. So it's, how do we create an environment where people feel comfortable being who they are, so that maybe Strava, by connecting them to some resources, can help them get to where they want to go. And that's that concept of identity and sense of belonging. And that's hard to do. It's because we're just at some level, we're just an app you download, and we have maybe 15 seconds, maybe 30 in that those first moments. You all have done this yourself, where you're like, oh no, this isn't for me. I got the wrong thing. I'm going to delete it right away. So that first 15, 30 seconds has got to be well thought through, hopefully not so specific, but specific enough so you know why you're there. Once you have a starting point, someone gets through a reg flow, we have a starting point, but you can't forget you're now in a conversation. They just said hello. You have to say hello back. You have to ask them, you have to sort of get engaged a little bit with what they're about. You can't just sort of say, great, you're now registered. Good luck. And that's really hard when, again, you're doing this for people all around the world, different levels of ability, different backgrounds. And that's one of the things we work on all the time, is how do we create when we know so little about somebody, how do we create an experience that can give us enough to work with, that we can start to tailor the experience to help you understand what Strava is for. And again, here's where focus comes in, which is we have to be okay with this not working for everybody. We have to choose who we want to be great for right now. And if we can do that well, we'll have the opportunity to broaden that in the future when we have more resources, when we have more of a sense of, does this all fit inside the same one single app of Strava, or to be able to go be relevant to an audience that's very different from our current audience, do we have to build a different experience in some other app perhaps, or do that through a company that we might acquire that brings some of our Strava-ness into that other experience, but keep it separate. So those are things that we have to make choices about. Again, what do we want to be the best at, and then focus on that.
Thank you. Appreciate that, and respect the effort to sort of constantly be trying to open that door, even as we recognize that these spaces that we're working in, athleticism, the outdoors, they are starting from a foundation of people who are already more able to do those things. And the question is, how can we continually bring new people into a space that has meaning for people who are experiencing it? Mm-hmm. So Jordan and I can keep asking questions, but we're excited to see people raising their hand and start bringing you guys into the conversation. It's an amazing resource to have Michael here. So I'm sure you guys have questions too. If you raise your hand, we'll get you in line. I'm going to start with Julia, and then Clara will go to you next.
Hi there. Actually, RVL and a couple HVL alum here that popped in. And a question I have for you is, I love the emphasis on focus and passion and using those two to drive something exciting. But my remaining question is, you guys were not the only ones in the space, and you were competing with companies with big brand recognition. And I guess I'm curious, like, what you think helped your passion and focus bubble to the top in front of brands like Under Armour and Nike and the other apps that I like less. And kind of that aspect of, I don't know, your success.
Yeah, yeah, we were kind of last to the party. There were lots of ways to track a workout already by the time we launched. And part of it was just like, just ignoring the fact that there was, not ignoring, but more like saying, if it's a good idea, there are always others trying to do the same thing. It's pretty rare that you'll find something that no one else has thought of that's an amazing, great idea, that there's no competition, if you will. So get ready for competition. And the second thing is like, thrive on competition. Figure out how to say like, yeah, we got some real tough competition, but that's going to make us stronger, not more. It's going to drive us. It's going to make us want to do work even harder. And then the third thing I think was a key ingredient here, which is we said, when we look at those experiences, we see something that doesn't speak to us. Like we're willing to look at them critically and say like, what's missing for us, as opposed to saying, well, we have to go do a market study and, go talk to lots of other people to figure out. We actually asked ourselves, like, why are we not incredibly excited about these experiences? And it was like, well, what they're missing is the team. They're missing the thing that we feel we missed by losing the boathouse was the people. We could always go track a workout, but the problem was we didn't want to go work out. We were missing the will, not the what, the will of getting our shoes on and getting out the door at, if it's dark or cold or whatever it is. And so what we thought was, maybe they just didn't have the experiences we had. And so maybe what we can do is actually create something that is very different. And Strava at its core starts with this premise that by connecting you to other people will help you stay motivated. So you can follow our concept, if you're not familiar, is you can follow other athletes in Strava. They can follow you back. You can do things like compete or collaborate with them around challenges, Strava segments. And that experience, that part of the experience was core to it, as opposed to being something on the periphery. So it was this idea that like, oh, wait, yeah, there's competition, but I think we have something that's much better than what they have. And why didn't they copy us? I mean, first of all, they probably didn't see us coming. Many of those Under Armour and Nike and so forth, they built their experiences to do one thing really well, which was to market their products. Their core thing is like, yeah, I want to sell shoes. I don't want to keep people active. I want them to buy shoes. And if they're more active, maybe they'll buy more shoes. But we didn't have that in mind. We had, let's build something so good the athlete would be willing to pay for it, the subscription business model. And so in that way, I think we were building a very different business. And they kind of probably didn't expect that we would ever get this far, maybe given that they were so big and we were so small when we started. But we stayed focused on building something that athletes would love to use and tell their friends about, and hopefully pay for someday. And that's proven to be like a really good strategy for us.
Great. Over to you, Clara.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. I'm a huge fan of Strava. I'm also on RVL currently. So my question's kind of about your theme of focusing on something and kind of like pursuing it. So after you decide to focus on something, how do you feel like you've been able to get a group of people to come together and follow through with it and work together to achieve that goal, whether that was captain of the lightweight rowing team or as founder of Strava? Do you feel like it was organic because you happen to share a similar vision, or do you feel like there were steps that you took as a leader to help others come together and grow under a shared mission?
That's a great question. I don't know if this is universally the only way, but for me, what it is, it's about the story I can tell. So I said I can't program a computer. I'm actually lousy at design. I'm not very artistic. I can't market anything, but I'm a pretty good storyteller. People tell me I'm pretty convincing. And so one of the things that you do in the beginning when you have an idea is you have to work at what is the story. And that can come through like, yeah, eventually it might show up as like a slide deck or a business plan. But before it's any of that, it's got to be something you can say to people. You've got to be able to be like, you're at this, in this group, in this setting, or they will happen someday. People will be going to parties again, or you'll be meeting up with friends. And they're like, what are you up to? And you can't just say, well, I don't know, I'm just working on something. I don't know if it's going to go. You have to tell a story. And when you tell the story, do people go, oh, wow, that sounds interesting? And so in the beginning, one of the things that I think, to get people on board to help, it was, what is it that is at this, that it's not a false story. It's the real thing. It's the thing you really believe in. It's the thing you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't stop thinking about because you're so excited about it. And when you start to get that going and you get that built, as that narrative comes together, the first thing is, I always think, boy, this story sucks. Like when I hear myself say it, that sounds really like it won't go anywhere. But if people react to it saying, that sounds really cool, and it makes me think of this other thing, and I heard about this other thing that's like that, then you've got a starting point and you can build from there. And so I think that's part of it, what's worked for me. A second thing is, like, one of the first type of people I look for, Mark and I look for, is someone who can help us make it more real. So it is just a story, but can we find someone who can build a prototype? And in the example for Kano software, we spent less than $20,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but bear with me here for a second. We spent far less than $20,000 to get a working prototype built of what we wanted to build for real later. And we used off-the-shelf database software and hired a contractor to build basically a front end on this thing to be able to show a first customer what we had in mind. And they said, great, I'll buy it. And we did that not because we didn't know that was the strategy that would work again and again and again in our lives, but it pointed at something, it made, like, the light bulb went off, which is, people have a hard time in many cases understanding what you're talking about unless you can make it real for them. So that I can tell a story. Some people can say, great, I can do a little thing to make it a little more real. And that's not the thing you're actually going to go do, but it helps you get there. Like, you can, by building, you call it a prototype, version 0.1, something that's not the thing you're actually going to go do, but it makes it a bit more real. That will help you tell the story better to other people who have a harder time when it's just the story. So it's like climbing a mountain. You put one step in front of the other, and pretty soon you're at 1,000 feet. You keep going, and you get up to 10,000 feet, and you've climbed the mountain. Right? You have to start at with that idea, at that first step.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely parallels for endurance athletes. James, I think you're next.
Yes, Michael, thank you so much for being here. I am not on one of the rowing teams, but I'm still an active Strava user and have loved using the platform. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, kind of along a similar vein, how you talked about when you were starting the company, which is kind of an online only existence. You and your co-founder both weren't computer programmers, and when that was something that was likely, such a large part of the early stages, how did you embrace not being able to know everything? How did you still help drive the company in its early stages?
It's a great question. I mean, I think the people that we attracted to Kano software in the very beginning, that was a different time. That was like the mid 90s. There weren't that many people who knew what anything. I mean, there were definitely people who knew how to, computer programming was a very different thing back then. If you were studying computer programming in college, you were probably studying some version of C++ or something very. I'm not sure if that's even a thing, if anyone teaches that anymore. But it wasn't the technologies that you needed to go build a website. You needed HTML, which is almost no one knew that. Had a concept of what that was. So very few people actually had the skills to go do anything except the people who were just coming out of college. And so we were pretty young too. I was 26 or something at the time. And so we were like, hey, we got this idea. You want to talk to us? Yeah, why not? I'll talk to you. So we weren't talking to like grown-ups who had done a lot of stuff before, who we had to go and convince, who maybe had a higher bar, but they didn't have the technology. We were talking to people who were, had probably just on their own learned some things about what it takes to build a website and a server backend, and they thought this was interesting because they didn't have there was nothing to compare it to. Strava is a little different. By 2009, now like all these technologies are pretty well established and developed. And so we're fortunate though that we had some experience. We had built something before, so we could at least have a little bit of a history. So when we're talking to people who have these skills and know these things, we at least have a little bit of now of understanding what it takes to build something with computers. It's like it's not easy, number one, and we have a little bit of a track record, so it was a little bit easier conversation. But again, it doesn't take too much to say. We don't have to explain to every bit of it. What we have to explain is what's our vision for what it could be for the experience, or in this case the product. Why is that useful? What's good about that? What is it? How does it connect to something that would actually create a good business? Because once you have the basis of that, I think the people who can help you get it built, they can say, okay, I can start to believe in that. I can start to believe, and if I put some effort in, we can start to see some progress towards that vision and towards that business outcome, and I can benefit in it directly. I will be part of building this thing. So it's finding the right people, I guess. Maybe James is saying, is like find the right people. Whether that's people who have less to lose and are more adventurous, or people who have done this before, starting with an idea and taking it all the way through to launching a product. And that goes along with things like tolerance for risk. That's an important aspect here as well.
Yeah, we can go to John. You want to ask a question?
Hi, thanks so much for being here. I'm a huge Strava fan, and it's definitely something that's kept me happy while I've been working out alone for most of this pandemic. I'd imagine being in Silicon Valley, you have a lot of other startups around you and a lot of inspiration. And so my question is, what are some other companies or startups that you admire, and why?
That's interesting. And I think there are definitely a lot of places in the world that are like Silicon Valley. So it's not the only place. Maybe it's the place that you read about the most, or it's been around for the longest. And there's a lot of truth to the idea that when you get this kind of center where entrepreneurship has happened in the past, you have a lot of the ingredients that makes it more likely to happen in the future, and you get this network effect that it feeds on itself, and it becomes really well established and known. But it's not the only place. I don't mean by any means you have to go just to move west after you graduate and come to San Francisco. There's a lot of talk, in fact, about how San Francisco is like there's a lot of problems with it's a high cost of living. There are a lot of other great places, and there are a lot of like the talent or the skill sets are now more broadly distributed. Do all the startup companies have to be in San Francisco? Kind of questions, but it is a really great environment. So I don't have a specific thing about saying like, here are 3 or 4 companies that I would really recommend you look at necessarily. Like, unfortunately, I'm not going to like give you the names of specific ones, but I would instead ask you to think about what are the areas that you're most interested in, and I'll give you a couple of choices. So are you interested in helping individuals, people, consumers, like at the individual level where there's over 7 billion people in the world? There's a lot of customers, right? Or are you interested in more like, no, that feels really far away, but I think that's more like in the business side. Like I want to help whole companies do something more effectively. Like I want to be involved in a company that's doing that. So the business side versus consumer side of how a company's oriented. So like a company like Airbnb, they said, we want to help people find places to stay, and we want to help people who have extra space rented out. That's a consumer experience, but it's like, we're going to create this marketplace. And so that's versus another company that maybe you've all heard of as Netflix, right? Which is, they started off by saying, people like renting DVDs. If you remember with DVDs, you used to rent them, go to the store, rent them. They said, what if you could get this streaming to you over the internet? And they did this in the late 90s, and everyone was like, that's nuts. It will never happen. You will never stream movies over the internet. Just the bandwidth won't be there. But Reed Hastings said, no, I know it won't happen now, but maybe it'll happen in 10 years. And so first, we're just going to mail you the DVD. And once the internet catches up, we're going to then stream it. So that's, again, consumer. But part of that part of that decision about consumer versus business is, do you want to, like, which problems do you think are more interesting to you? Do you want to help people lead more meaningful lives? Let's boil it down to that. Or do you want to help companies that might be helping people lead more meaningful lives? Do you want to solve problems for the company? So then another choice you want to make is, like, do you want to make a physical product at the end of the day? Do you want to make something that's digital, based on do you want to work in life sciences? These are kind of choices you want to make based on what you're kind of, how you're wired, what you're about. And then I'll give you a place to look to find some companies. So go look at the websites for the venture firms that back startup companies. And you can find those in a lot of different places. TechCrunch is a good website to go look for, but it's not so important to know, like, oh, which are the best venture firms? Because I mean, they're all, the ones who survive are all okay, but it's more like, what are they backing? What are the things that you see that look interesting? Because if you look at the sites for the VCs, you're effectively what you're following is the money. You're following, where are the investments going? And not that that's the only sign of success, but that's at least one indicator, like, that one might be an interesting company because someone has already looked at them and decided to invest in them. So hopefully that gives you, like, a little bit of how you can do your own hunting around, looking around for something that's interesting for you.
Jack, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks again for coming. I'm wondering, so I think the past couple of years, there's been a lot more criticism of a lot of social media companies, and I think actually Strava is very different from Facebook and a lot of common punching bags. I'm wondering what kind of criticism Strava has gotten and how you respond to that. So
I only heard that you're asking about comparison to, so it's a little garbled, but you're asking about comparison to Facebook, or like it's effectively about social networks and what's.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
No, what kind of criticism has Strava gotten, and how have you responded to that? Is that, yeah. So I think it's a really timely question. Thanks for asking it. So when we started, we said, yeah, someday we want to be known as a social network. And then we're like, no, we don't want to be known as a social network. Like, what's wrong with social network is there's a lot of stuff wrong. If you haven't seen the movie Social Dilemma, the documentary, you should see it. It's really interesting. We have not heard the same criticism about Strava. And I think there are a couple of reasons why. Number one, we bring a lot of happiness to your life instead of like making you feel. Most of the people would say Strava is, part of the most meaningful part of my life, my day. I get to go be active, do something I enjoy doing. It shows up on Strava. I get some sense of satisfaction that the people who follow me give me kudos and comments, and it makes me feel like I want to go do this again. So it's like a positivity to Strava that often isn't there on other social networks. It's more likely to find negativity on other social networks compared to Strava. I tell you, it's not like we're immune to it. We made a commitment in June to be an anti-racist company, have made that very public, have done things to make that clear to people. We've got a lot of hate speech on Strava. We've had to work on moderating, getting rid of people with bad attitudes towards our commitment. And like, that's an example where there's definitely going to be negativity on any network, but how do you take care of it? What do you do to make sure it doesn't spread and become more pervasive? And then I think the other aspect that makes Strava different is we go deep into something very specific to your life. We're not trying to be everything, like, we're not trying to connect you to a broad selection of people. We want you to, this is about being active, a passion you share. So you're connecting more with people who share that same interest that you have. And so it protects us from being as prone to being like, well, we don't have, for example, advertising on our site. We're not turning our users into the product by having advertisers get to pay to reach them. So a lot of things that keep us from having some of the same problems.
Thank you. This is all fascinating. I want to just do a quick time check and note that we are at 7. So if anyone has to go, no worries. And Michael, we don't want to keep you too much longer. I wonder if you have just a few minutes to answer our last 2 questions.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it. I've been waiting patiently, Michael and Charles. So.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it. So we'll pass it to you. Charles, are you there?
Yeah. So just on that last point, one of the things that I was going to mention, well, first off, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us. But when Strava made that public commitment to being an anti-racist organization, as well as some of its initiatives around sort of getting out the vote, I'm curious, especially as it relates to sort of this theme of focus, what sort of thought processes come to your and your team's mind when sort of you're weighing whether to sort of pursue new initiatives that may be seen as a little bit tangential to sort of the core idea of running and sort of just physical activity, and sort of just what processes come to mind there, and how do you balance sort of taking on something bold and new, but also preserving that core mission there?
Yeah, it's a question we ask ourselves every day. We have something we call the noise of opportunity at Strava. That's a phrase to say there's always more ideas than time and people to go do them. And so you do have to be really mindful of every day you're making choices and prioritizing some things over other things. And so, we actually had these questions. Some people said, is choosing to be, is making a commitment to be an anti-racist company somehow going to distract us from building, say, a more successful business, and or is focusing on getting the people we can reach in our athlete community to understand the importance of living in a democracy means that you actually take part in the democratic process. You have to do that if you want it to remain a democracy. Like those are important principles that you'd say, aren't those competing with like your objective to be, you could say, are they competing with your objective to be as successful a business as possible? I'd say really simply is you have to take the long view. We want Strava to be here for the next 100, 200 years. And in that mind, with that frame of mind, we want the world to be the kind of world that is receptive to Strava. And that world, in our view, is anti-racist and democratic. So in essence, what we're doing is we're thinking about the long run success of the business by focusing on these commitments to how we believe we will, and this goes along with things like in 50 years, if we want to even be outdoors to exercise, we need to think about the environment. To think about the environment the right way, we need to think about our democratic process. If we fail to recognize that a big problem with our democratic system is that we marginalize minorities in our system to not, and we see this time and time again, that we keep people from voting because of the laws that we enact. We have to fight all of that if we even want to get outside in 50 years. Like that's like the long run view. So I think this is where you do tell a story. You do tell, again, you present this to the company as saying, this is in our long-term building the best business we can. We need to make these commitments.
We can go to the last question from Michael.
Yeah. Hey, Michael, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I'm currently working on something that I like calling the Strava for charitable giving and social impact. So this was a beyond incredible talk for you to give. My question relates to if you could speak a little bit to the evolution of Strava over the years. The company's been around for more than 10 years now. And it's something that when I think of I can definitely see, like, it feels like really in the past year and a half that Strava's really popped and taken off. And so I'm wondering if you can speak about like the evolution and maybe about a little bit about how the vision has adapted or maybe stayed the same over the years.
Yeah, there's a rich history here. I'll try to do it in just a couple of minutes because I know everyone's hanging on here for a few extra minutes. So we started the company in 2009, and Mark and I are co-founders of the company. We've been friends since college. All that's part of this. The ebb and flow of where the company has been is really focused first and foremost on, can we create something that's authentic, that the athlete will say, this is built for me. I will tell my friends about it because I love using it so much. That was a lot of the initial phase of the company. What you saw in this last year was we stepped back in to run the company a year ago. And the prior 2 years, there had been a CEO that we had hired from outside to come and run the company when neither one of us were in a position in our lives where we could do so. And during that time, a lot of good stuff happened. It wasn't like that person was running the company into the ground, but we got so diversified. We lost the focus on what we wanted to be the best at. And we started to do a lot of different things, experiments, if you will, different revenue streams. Some of them looked like advertising. We started to think about how we would eventually get into other businesses that weren't actually core to the athlete. It there's a lot of stuff that was distracting us from the original mission. So what you've experienced in this last year is a return to the original mission of let's build something that connects people to what motivates them and helps them find their personal best, the way they want to live their lives. And I'm glad you actually saw that in the last year, because it is very different. And it turns out it's a much better business as a result. We've grown really well during this last year. We've been able to connect much more strongly the value of a Strava subscription. So I believe, again, it reinforces that idea that decide what you want to be the best at and focus on it, and good things will happen from there. So that evolution, that's an example where, like, stick with your idea. It will evolve. Ask yourself questions on a regular basis. As do we have the right mission in mind? If we do, then let's go at it with conviction.
Great parting advice for all of us to focus during this unstructured time. And really, thank you to Jordan for organizing this talk. Thank you to our three Michaels, Michael Wu for a great question, Michael Wallace for bringing Michael Horvath into our life. This has been a wonderful talk, and we are just so grateful for your time. Really excited for everyone to keep getting outside and staying active in this time. I think it's a terrific mission. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's really nice to be here. And thank you for inviting me. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye.